Well, let's talk now to Chris Doyle, who is the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. And he joins me live now from here in London. Thank you very much for joining us on the News Hour. What would your comments be on the level of confusion by the international community to this conflict?
The international community, right from the outset, from the get-go, has been utterly dismal in the way that it's gone about this. It was very slow to realize the acute dangers of what would happen. It was extremely slow to state very clearly that Israel had to adhere to the rules of law, the rules of war, and so allowed a siege to be enacted, a siege that deprived a civilian population of water, food, medicine, and power. It's been very slow, very reluctant to issue any form of criticism of Israeli actions. So, for example, in Britain, I've yet to hear one single government minister issue any criticism of Israeli actions or inactions since the 7th of October, whether it's in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, where we've seen this extraordinary level of settler violence backed by the Israeli army. So we are seeing a very weakened international community. It is divided, but the European states and the United States are seen as engaged in hypocrisy and double standards because of the complete reluctance to hold Israel to account at all. It was, of course, those countries spoke out very clearly against the Hamas atrocities, very clearly that Hamas had violated international law, that it would be held accountable, but not in terms of how Israel conducts itself. That's not to compare like for like, but it's to compare the expectation that all parties to a conflict should operate according to international law. Also, we have seen a very dismal response on the humanitarian front. I mean, really, it's embarrassing that we see negotiations ongoing as to whether you're going to get 15 or 20 trucks in. We should have had 15,000 trucks going into Gaza in the month since the 7th of October, instead of getting about 450 as of yesterday. We are seeing a situation of unparalleled man-made humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, where people are having sips of water and 2 pieces of bread a day, and the hospitals are closing. This is absolutely an extraordinary international failure. An international failure, of course, that hasn't just been there for the last month, but for decades, because the international community has so failed to bring about a lasting resolution to this conflict that would be actually in the interests of both Israelis and Palestinians.
We've already seen a month of enormous brutality and bloodshed, and now we're entering into a second month. It may be hard to see, but where do you see the solution coming from for all this? And actually, what could it look like?
It's very interesting that you just still get no sense that the Israeli decision makers, and in many ways they are the ones with the most power, the most ability to change the situation on the ground, do not agree. So yesterday we have Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that Israeli forces would remain in security control now within the Gaza Strip as opposed to the outside for an indefinite period of time. But you have others within the Israeli cabinet even who've articulated a different future. You have a defense minister who thinks actually Israel needs to get right out, close all the borders, have no workers coming into Israel from Gaza, a complete disassociation. And you have Benny Gantz, who's just joined the Israeli cabinet, also envisaging a different future. I'm not sure they are convinced as to what the outcome will be. Now, this matters because any military strategist knows that if you enter into a war, you must have very clear end games. What does victory mean? And if victory here is to go through every single house, building, tunnel, and everything else to root out anybody who could be possibly linked to Hamas, well, that's going to take a very long time and will be nigh impossible. So at some point, this is where the international community needs to step in. And it needs to say very clearly, this bombardment can't continue. We need the ceasefire, and then we need to come to a political arrangement. Now, that political arrangement could exclude Hamas, for example, from political and military power within Gaza, or at least attempt to. But it needs to ensure that Palestinians will be in charge of their own affairs in Gaza. It needs to ensure that at the end of all of this, that Gaza can breathe, which it hasn't been able to for 16 years, that it can trade, that people can travel, that they can fish beyond 6 nautical miles, that it actually can have a reasonably normal existence. That would be, by the way, a very powerful antidote to everything that's going on. And it would certainly bring greater security to both Israelis and Palestinians. But we need to have senior statesmen articulating such a future, where Gaza does have an horizon, where people in Gaza, Palestinian civilians who have not participated in this conflict, they're not part of it, they haven't carried out attacks, actually see that the international community does care for their futures, and that there could be a different scenario, and they're out of the rubble, that there could be some sort of life for them. Because at the moment, it just looks bleaker and bleaker, grimmer and grimmer every day, and all they're talking about is death, where to die,
Sure.
not where to live.
OK. Yeah, sure. It's certainly hard to imagine for those people there, no doubt. Chris Doyle, thank you very much for joining us, the Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, joining us live here in London.